What we did last week, we talked about key establishment. We introduced a little bit of terminology, but then the focus was on symmetric protocols, in particular this KDC, key distribution center, right? Kerberos type of schemes. To some extent, what we are going to do today is for practice, in particular, if you're not dealing with cryptography later in life, but if you deal with internet type of stuff, the most important lecture of the whole 2 semesters, because we're probably going to introduce the main topic where people in IT professionals interact with cryptography, namely certificates. At the end of, in 90 minutes or so, we will talk about certificates. And that is the one thing you interact with, even if you don't do security in a job, but if you become system administrator or whatever, or hardware engineer, at some point, certificate is not being recognized by your web browser. And that's what we're going to do today. So today's topics are a little bit of intro to asymmetric key establishment. This is brief and painless. MIMT, which stands for man in the middle attack, which is the most important part of today. That's we have to be awake. This is super important. It's not very difficult, super important. Get ready to wake up in 20 minutes. And then, as I said before, we're going to talk about certificates. So what's going to happen today, in a nutshell, in 30 seconds, I'm going to show you an extremely powerful, extremely universal attack, works against all public key schemes. It's not complicated. We have to repair that situation, right? We have to find a countermeasure. These are certificates. This is what's going to happen today, next 80 minutes. Introduction to asymmetric key establishment. So the goal is, we have Alice and Bob, and we're going to have a lot of Alice and Bobs today in this lecture. We have the unsecured channel. There's a key which somehow has to be distributed over an unsecured channel without a secure channel, so we cannot hand deliver that, blah, 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 blah. So what do we do? There are two key approaches to this key distribution problem here. First, key agreement, e.g. Diffie-Hellman, which will be the main part of today. You're going to see a lot of Diffie-Hellman today, just in a few minutes. But just for completeness, there's a second approach, which we briefly mentioned, and I just want to bring that up again so that you are aware of that, which is called key transport, which we might or might have not introduced when we talked about introduction to public key cryptography, or maybe Diffie-Hellman, which is to some extent a simpler approach, or maybe, I don't know, more natural. So what you can also do is, if you have a public key, not a key exchange algorithm, but public key encryption, such as RSA, what you can do, Bob generates his public-private key pair, sends the public key over, and now what Alice only does, Alice chooses a random number, random 128-bit, encrypts the key, so it's only key transport is encryption. You encrypt that with the RSA algorithm, you know that might be RSA or El-Gamal. You send the encrypted key over, and Bob is the only one who can decrypt, right? That's the idea of public key cryptography. So, and he recovers K. So it means after this step, Bob knows the key, the secret key, and Alice knows the secret key because she picked it. And now we said, you know, in this figure here, you can use, for instance, I use this key for doing AES encryption, AES decryption. Okay, this key transport is, again, to some extent, it's an easier scheme than Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Okay, but what we're going to do today is we look at what we're going to do today, we look at problems that all public key schemes have, and not only key agreement, by the way, it's also digital signatures have that problem, and whatever else you can do with public key cryptography. So, but we do that by example of Diffie-Hellman. Okay, but the general approach is to key establishment using public key algorithm, asymmetric key establishment, are these two. Either you do key agreement, that means both parties somehow compute the key jointly, or we do key transport, that means Alice picks the key and sends it over. And for instance, if you look at the SSL, secure socket layer, or TLS, it's also called TLS, this is your little lock, kind of Schloss, in your web browser. They actually allow both options. There are a lot of options in SSL, and you and the Amazon DE server agree on a certain protocol, and they allow both Diffie-Hellman and RSA. Okay, so they're both extremely widely used. You can't say this is more important than the other one. So what we're now going to do, if you're not very smart, if you're not very interested in the stuff we're doing here, and you didn't read ahead, and you don't, interested in security issues in general, your view on the world of cryptography should be key distribution, not a problem. We have two ways of solving this problem. We can do everything, okay? And this is dead wrong, okay? There's a big problem we have not addressed. I mean, from everything that I taught you so far, it seems we can do, for instance, this protocol. Alice and Bob can come up with an AES session key. We can do pretty much everything we want. There's no problem anymore. And this is not true. And why is that? Because I didn't tell you the whole truth up to now. Okay, and I'm always debating, should I introduce this attack earlier? And there are good reasons to do that, and there are good reasons not to do that, right? And I'm not introducing earlier. I'm introducing that, today's second to last lecture of how many? Of 28 lectures. Okay, and again, there are good arguments to do that earlier, but I prefer to do that at this moment in time. So this is what we're going to do. So after today, in about 1 hour, your whole Weltbild, your whole view of the universe should collapse, right? In 20 minutes, you think, oh God, what did Professor Parr do with us? Okay, and this is happening now here. So I'm telling you the whole truth. So we're done, make a check mark on number 1. We're already at chapter number 2. Man in the middle, this is typically written with these hyphens, Bindestriche, which we abbreviate MIMT, man in the middle. No. What is it? Man in the middle. Mittem. Mitem. Oh yeah, by the way, there is, when we did multiple encryption with block ciphers, double encryption with DES, for instance, we talked about meat in the middle attack, which sounds pretty close to man in the middle attack. Completely different movie, has nothing to do with what we're doing here. Okay, so we look at, I continue here because I want to have the whole blackboard. Wir look Diffie-Hellman revisited, also nochmal wiederholt, but with active attacker. What is an active attacker? We're going to see in a minute. So, this is going to be super important. This is what probably 10 people wrote or 8 people wrote in the evaluation sheet. It's good that Professor Parr alerts us when we have to be awake. This is this moment in time. Super important. Okay? Including the last row. Ja, Sie, genau. Haben Sie mitgekriegt? Ich habe gerade gesagt, irgendwie 18% der Leute haben in dem Evaluierungsbogen geschrieben, es ist gut, wenn ich Leuten sage, bitte wach sein. Das ist jetzt. Okay? So stop doing Facebook. Okay. So we're doing Diffie-Hellman. You see, I'm using more space because we're putting Oscar in the middle later on. Okay, first we look at Diffie-Hellman without Oscar. We have a private key A. We have a public key uppercase A. Bob has the same. What do they do? How does Diffie-Hellman work? Alice sends uppercase A over. Did you notice that the error only goes up to here? Do the same. It's not going up to here. Okay. Oscar is going to do bad things in a minute. Bob is sending over B. And then upon reception, Alice computes K. Let's call that KAB, which is, she takes Bob's public key and raises this to her private key power. And by the way, I'm not using this mod P today because there will be enough information on the blackboard already, so I don't want to confuse you more. So, of course, everything should be taken mod P, and P is a large prime, blah, 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 blah. And Bob does the same. Bob also computes the session key by taking Alice's key and raising Alice's key to his private key power. So only Bob can do that. So this scheme is not provable secure, but it is computationally secure. That means for practice it is secure, in particular if the numbers are large enough. If P is a 2048-bit number and carefully chosen, you have to watch out for some other little number theoretical things, but this is not even that difficult. So this is secure as far as we know, be awake, if the attacker, Oscar, is only passive. So this works perfectly well if Oscar is passive. Passive, what I think I introduced it. What is a passive attacker? What can a passive attacker do? Yeah.
He can only listen on the channel.
Exactly. Listen only. As long as he can only listen, eavesdropping is a very fancy term, lauschen, okay? So as long as he can only listen, this works nicely. And all the assumption we had so far, using large primes and then everything is secure, what I just mentioned, this works if Oscar can only listen. But what about an active attacker, which we have to absolutely take into account, active attacks? If you communicate over the internet, we have so little control over the channel. If I'm sending an email to somebody in Belgium, I have no idea where my message is being routed. And it would be very naive to assume an attacker can only listen, but an attacker cannot change my IP packets, right? So you always have to, not always, but in most practical circumstances, we have to take active attackers into account. And now it's getting really, really interesting. So here is what nasty Oscar can do. He intercepts. And what Oscar does, he generates his own public key. How does he do that? Well, he does kind of similar what Alice does, just with, I call that O, lowercase o, right? Kleines o is Oscar's private key, and let's call that O1, because we're going to have two of those. And Oscar is very sneaky. He doesn't call that, here's what we're not doing, don't copy. Call that, this is Oscar's public key. He doesn't do that, right? He essentially calls this A, right? He says, hey, I'm Alice's key. Because this is A, we call it A tilde here. A snake. And what he forwards to Bob is A tilde. He does this, it's a symmetric setup, Diffie-Hellman, so he has to do that on the other side as well. That means he intercepts Bob's key, that's going through the internet router. He picks a different O, different private key, and he calls this B tilde, and B tilde is forwarded to Alice. So what happens now is very, very, very unpleasant. One thing that's not happening is Alice is not computing KAB anymore. What does Alice do? The problem is Alice doesn't see the tilde, right? Alice thinks this is B, right? B is only, these are 2048 innocent bits. It doesn't smell like Bob's perfume or something, right? What I'm trying to say, you get bits here which say, hey, I'm coming from Bob. Alice has no way of knowing whether they're really from Bob, so she assumes they are probably Bob's. So what she does, of course, she's following the protocol. She takes B tilde, raises it to her 8th power. But now what is this B? B, this is alpha raised to Alice, to Oscar's private key. So this, she computes O2. So she does compute a Diffie-Hellman key. There's no question about that. So this is a Diffie-Hellman protocol. There's nothing. There's something fishy about it, but it's still Diffie-Hellman from the mathematics. But what would be a better name for this? Before we call it KAB, key between Alice and Bob, what would be a better name at this point here? Loud? Which letter should I use here? Oh, we have another 60 minutes. What? Any ideas? Alice, right? And who's the other person? Yeah, absolutely. So this is a session key between Alice and Oscar, except Alice is a little bit naive. She thinks this is KAB. She doesn't know that there's an O here, right? She doesn't know that this is the key that she computed with Oscar. And of course, the unpleasant thing is Oscar can compute the same session key. Oscar can compute KAO. How does he do that? He takes A and raises it to the O1 power. So what happened here is Alice and Oscar did the nice little private Diffie-Hellman key exchange. There's nothing wrong with that, except Oscar, of course, knows that he is talking to Alice. Alice does not know that she's talking to Oscar. Alice still thinks this is the key she shares with Bob.
Aber muss das nicht nach also hoch 2 genommen werden?
Ich habe irgendwas falsch. I did something wrong here. Right. Yeah. This is correct. Yeah, very good. Yeah, of course, because O2 is here. Very good, thank you. So, again, Alice and Oscar have established the key with each other. Since this is a metric setup, Oscar can do the same trick with Bob. How does this work? Again, Bob, let's start with Bob. Bob gets R tilde, so he's not doing that anymore. He's computing R tilde to the bth. And what he computes is a session key between himself, Bob, and Oscar. Oscar can do the same trick again. He can compute his, the same session key, KBO, which is raised to the O1 power. Is this right? What happens here? Yeah, this is alpha to the O1 raised to the b's power. Okay. So yeah, if you want to have somewhat of a proof that this attack works, you look where A is coming from. A is alpha to the A to the O2. And this is alpha to the B to the O1. Oscar shares a session key with Alice and one with Bob. However, Alice and Bob still think they are talking to each other. I know this is exactly what I told you before, but because this is so important, I want to write that down. Still think they are talking to each other. What are the implications? Implications are actually quite horrible. Oscar has now full control over the communication Alice and Bob. let's look what that means. Is having full control over communication. It seems a little bit vague. Sehr gut. Danke. So what does this mean? And I did that in the past. Sometimes I did that in this drawing, and this becomes very messy, very unordentlich. So let's look now what happens. I mean, this was only key exchange. Nothing has happened so far. No real damage. The real damage starts, of course, if Alice and Bob start to exchanging messages. So this is now, 1 minute later after the key exchange, 1 second later in the protocol. So let's say Alice wants to encrypt. I mean, there are all kinds of things they want to do maybe with their session keys, and maybe the most straightforward, the most best demonstration of this attack is if you do plain old encryption. So you have your secret email. You encrypt, let's say, using, I use AES at this point here. You can just use this little E symbol, the E letter, which you normally use, but I think it's maybe more extreme. This is AES 256. Super secure, NSA approved, cannot be broken, blah, 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 blah. Which key does Alice use? Well, obviously the key she just computed. K index Alice Oscar. Again, and I cannot overstress that Alice thinks this is KAB, right? She sends Y over. And what Oscar has to do, he has to be very alert, aufmerksam. If Y would arrive here, decryption wouldn't work, right? Oscar would try to decrypt using KBO, and decryption wouldn't work, right? And if Y has a checksum, if that's whatever, if that's an email, if Oscar would do this here, don't copy. With KBO, and that's the only key he has, obviously, this is not X anymore, right? So that it's not an email, so it doesn't work. So. Yeah, but still, Oscar knows Bob is going to do that, right? If the message arrives, we're in trouble here. So Oscar has to do something. One thing that what he's probably going to do here is that he is definitely, he can decrypt, and which is the first problem that we have. So he can decrypt Y using the session key that he shares with Alice. So this becomes KAO and recovers X. And one thing that Oscar can do, he can stop at this point, right? He simply doesn't forward this message. Like, think about military context, some kind of command that never arrived. Bob might not be waiting for a message. Oscar can read that. So this is one thing. The other thing he can do, he can forward that. But what does he have to do so that he forwards the message so that Bob can still decrypt that, ja? Genau, man muss das nochmal verschlüsseln mit diesem Schlüssel hier. Exactly. So he re-encrypts the message. So this option 1 is stopping, Now comes option 2 is he encrypts X, but with a different key. And of course, we are not allowed to call that Y here. You know why? Because the this Y, this ciphertext, and this ciphertext are different, right? They're different bit patterns. So let's call that, what did I call that? I think Y prime. Okay, so this becomes a different beast. And now he forwards Y prime to Bob. What does Bob do? Well, Bob, again, Bob is still thinking, I'm talking to Alice, so he's following kind of what follows from the, what's implicit in the Diffie-Hellman protocol. He decrypts using his session key. So he computes X is the AES decryption of Y prime using KBO. So that's the second thing that he can do, and there's a third variant of that which I particularly like, because it's, to me, always it shows even more how damaging this whole thing is. And where did I write it down? Talked about full control over the channel. So far we had kind of two things that we could do. Either interrupt, which is not that difficult actually, interrupting, if you can interrupt the communication, he doesn't even have to do this man in the middle, he just stops forwarding that. This is kind of getting more interesting, right? He re-encrypts, but really full control over the channel can also mean the following. Let's say this is a transfer, right? And X is the message, this is a bank, Bob is a bank. This is Alice, right? She does e-banking, and Alice says, please transfer 10 euros into Oscar's account. Of course, it's very interesting for Oscar to change the 10 euros to 10,000 euros. Everybody with me? How's that real world? Yeah. So he can do this, right? He changes this electronic transfer, this Überweisung, he changes, flips a few bits. And what happens, this becomes a real Y prime here, and of course the bank gets this faked Überweisung, right? The falsified Überweisung, transfer. It's a problem, right, what we have here. So you see, really, it's, from attack, this is beautiful. Okay, now comes the, should I use? I write something in red, which I do text in red, which I rarely do. If you drop out of this IT security bachelor program here, please keep the following sentence in mind, okay? The man in the middle attack works against all public key schemes. This is clear. I think this is important, yeah? Everybody with me? Do you have this yellow highlighter with this toxic ink in it? Use that at this point, right? Or hang it over your bed, right? So this is life lesson. This is super dangerous, this stuff here. There will be a homework problem that the attack always works, and now maybe discuss it, why does this always work? If you follow it closely and if you're not very smart, your conclusion so far would be, oh, that's kind of a cool attack, and they're really, this is great what we can do from an Oscar's perspective. But you should also think, that looks very much as this is an attack against Diffie-Hellman and not a general problem. So what you should maybe not understand is, why is this in red here, right? Well, where is this statement coming from? Okay, and now I'm going to explain you that this is a universal attack, which is not necessarily clear at this moment. I mean, clear at this moment should be, this is a very powerful attack against Diffie-Hellman. This statement says, this is a very powerful attack that works at every single time you want to do something with public key cryptography, you have this problem. The question is, what is maybe the basis or the basis of the attack? So what we really want to understand, what is fundamentally wrong with it here? What's happening? I mean, one thing is we look at that, well, you can exchange keys, but what is the kind of the big picture? No, not the big picture, but what is on a more fundamental and understanding level, what is happening here? Why is this attack working? And the answer to that is the public keys are not authenticated. Not authenticated. What do we mean by authenticated? If you go back, when we talked about digital signatures, we had an intermezzo, a brief interloop where we talked about security services. In particular, this big security service I talked about, this was example with buying a Volkswagen online and on repudiation. One of the other security services which we didn't really take for all that serious was authentication, message authentication. And this is happening. We're violating authentication. What's really happening in practice here is this is not only 2048-bit. Sending 2048 bits over the channel without any additional information would be pretty stupid. What do I mean? At least there must be an indication, hey, these are the following 2048 bits are Alice's public key. That means this must, in practice, this is always accompanied with some kind of header, right? I call that ID. ID is the Identität. It could be the email address, could be the name, or what employee number, Mitarbeiternummer, your student number, Immatrikulationsnummer, or whatever, right? Some kind of identifying information, and this kind of comes as a package. What's happening now here is if Oscar runs the attack, what's really happening, obviously, is this here, right? It should be the ID of all. Don't copy. Hey, this is Oscar's key. He's not stupid, right? So that would give everything away, because then it would say, oh, here the wrong key is coming, right? So what Oscar does is, of course, this, right? He still says, here, I'm Alice's key. It's not Alice's key, right? It's Oscar's key. But he doesn't say so, right? He's lying. He's cheating. So, and this is now a violation of authentication. You get the, I don't know whether that's the right thing what I'm explaining, but this is what's happening here. This is being, also message integrity is both violated. Authentication, message integrity, you're fooling around with the message. Same thing, by the way, is happening here. So, and what we have to do here, we have to protect against this attack. We're done with it. Okay, so it's a very good question. He said, why don't we sign the message? Because exactly, signature protects against this kind of attack, right? This is coming from. The problem is, if you use standard digital signatures, you can again run this attack. Okay, and I haven't really talked about that here. maybe as response to here, why this is, and I think this is going to answer your there was a very good remark. I think in order to answer your question, I really have to answer this explain a little bit this red box here. Namely, what Oscar does is, if the public key is over the channel, if the public key is coming over, it says I'm Alice's public key, he replaces it with his public key. This idea, this principle always works. If you use digital signatures, you have a public key, right? Well, in digital signature, what do you use the public key for? For what function? Wofür braucht man den? Verification, exactly. So what you do, if the public key is being sent over, again, you replace the verification key, right? And Oscar puts in his verification key, and then he can do this thing. So every time Oscar can replace the public key with his own one in every asymmetric protocol. That means the fact that makes this attack very universal, that makes it always work, any type of public key you're doing is this step really here. If you see a public key, which has the actual public key, the number theoretical information, the 2048 bits here, cyclic groups, blah, 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 together with the ID information, you always replace only the actual public key, but you keep the identifying information the same. You can do that any public key. We did a lot of public key schemes over the last 3 months. I could give you any public key scheme, and I could give you 10 minutes, and each of you, everybody in this room, would come up against a similar attack. We could pick Elgamal encryption, we could do RSA encryption, we could do elliptic curve, Diffie-Hellman, whatever scheme, even new wild protocols practice. You might, they're not like this, there may be 2 pages, of exchanges back and forth. In every single instant, if I give you just a little bit of time, you could come up with a similar attack here. It's very powerful. So the question is what to do about it, and now we're going to start talking about countermeasures, namely third chapter. Certificates. Well, what you just saw here, the keys are not authenticated. The keys say, I'm coming from Alice, they're not coming from Alice. This is what we called message authentication, or for short, just authentication. So the idea is, well, we did that, Professor Parr introduced, whenever it was, 5 weeks ago or so, we introduced digital signature, and we introduced a measure, a tool, cryptographic tool, that provides authentication. So use a crypto tool from the crypto toolbox that provides authentication. And there are 2 such tools that we have. So the 2 primitives that can do that, and one already gave away. You can use digital signatures just for completeness. There's another crypto function that we can use, which we also introduced recently. What is the other crypto function that provides authentication? Max, very good. You could use message authentication codes. And why is that probably a stupid idea? Without going into details, just very general consideration. Why are MACs probably not a good thing to use at this point? What are MACs based on? What type of crypto is that? What? Symmetric. Okay. They work beautifully, but the symmetric crypto. So if you use MAC, what you have to do, you suddenly go back to the old stuff. You use symmetric cryptography to protect an asymmetric scheme. That means we have all these problems with key exchange, blah, blah, blah. You have they're associated with MAC. So you could use beta. I mean, it would work, but we would get all the problems we're trying to get rid of by using public key cryptography. We would reintroduce. So we don't want to use MAC, we want to use digital signatures. I just give something away, which I normally would tell you in 15 minutes, but which seems a little bit like a flaw, Fehler in the argumentation, Fehler in der Argumentationskette. Namely, so what I'm telling you now is, okay, we use digital signatures to prevent this attack, to repair the situation. But where should be the problem with that, with this argument? Why should that be a stupid argument, yeah? Exactly. Digital signatures are based on public key. Do you see the red box? I mean, I'm saying this attack always works against any public key scheme, and what I'm not now proposing to you is, well, let's use another public key scheme to repair all public key schemes, right? There seems to be a conflict, right? But we get a way out of that, okay? This is to some extent valid, but not really, and you will see why towards the end of the lecture. Just to warn you, or maybe not so much to warn you, but people who really paid a lot of attention, they should see the conflict, and we will see in practice you can resolve the problem. You can resolve the conflict. So, and what do we do here? We want to prevent that Oscar, rips that apart. That Oscar takes this message and replaces part of this message. And how do we do that? Well, you create needs a centrally trusted authority, and we did talk about trusted authorities when we talked about symmetric schemes, and one example was the KDC, key distribution center, in the case of symmetric-based cryptography. And for whatever reason, we use a different name here. We call this a certifying, is that correct? Certifying authority or CA. This is a very common expression. If you Google, actually I did, when I prepared the lecture notes, I Googled a little bit in Wikipedia, a little bit with that. You get like 1 million hits if you Google for certifying authority or CA. So what's the idea here? Now every user, and now we change terminology, but it's really, this is one thing why I like this lecture. If you look at this whole literature that deals with CA certifying authorities, root certificates, chains of trust, blah, 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 there are books written, 380 pages books, it all boils down to this very simple thing here. So what you're doing, what a certificate really is, a certificate is only a public key. If you get this warning in your web browser, certificate not valid and stuff, what this really means is it's not a valid public key that we really know, that we can check. The idea is very, very simple. Alice, from now on, instead of using just her naked public key, she's using a certificate. But again, from now on, think about certificate as being a public key. So certificate for Alice, and of course you can use any name here, is, at its core, it's just Alice's public key together with the ID of Alice. So exactly what we have at this point here. It's just this here. Okay. But now we have to protect that, and how to protect that? Well, we just kind of agreed, let's try digital signatures. A signature needs, obviously, a private key, right? To yeah, for computing is, or this is K public of Alice. So K public of Alice and the ID of Alice get digitally signed, and that's a certificate. The question is who computes it, who does this, who is allowed to compute this digital signature. This is K private, for people who like indices, comma CA. So this is how it works. This is this is page generating of certificates. This is page 345 in the textbook, which is over there. So this is kind of simplified, obviously, but this is how it roughly works in practice. So Alice wants the certificates. It means what she really wants. She wants to have some protection for a public key. So she goes to the CA, which is some kind of. Sometimes they're actual commercial entities. They're also sometimes governments that actually issue CAs here. So she sends a request with her public key and her ID. The first thing that the CA has to do, it's one of these things that are not part of crypto. She has to verify the identity. This is not an easy thing. Who is with an Internetbank here in this room? Wer macht Internetbanking mit so einer Internetbank, so in Stieber, right? They have the same problem, right? You open a new account, how do they, it's tempting for you to open an account in my name, for instance, right? And then do a big dispo credit and, all these things. So the same with, how do banks really identify, make sure they're talking to the right person? Particularly on the internet, this is not always an easy issue, right? Ideally you should show up there, show your Personalausweis, your national ID card, or your passport, or your birth certificate. This is all stuff we're not discussing here in this lecture. So, and now the CA signs, right? She takes this stuff here, this information, she computes the signature here, and let's call that S index A, and then the certificate becomes, just as we just thought, this kind of the raw information together with a signature over this information, and this whole thing becomes certifying A. Okay. Good. So, if we do that, what can we do from now on? Now let's look at Diffie-Hellman with certificates. We have Alice, we have Bob, and we have Oscar. So Alice has S before A is K private, lowercase a. Uppercase A is K public. Bob has also lowercase b is his private key. Uppercase B is his public key. Alice sends now, this is the whole idea, she's not sending over just her private key or her ID information. She's sending over a certificate consisting of A, ID of A, and now we use this term SR here, S lowercase a, which is a signature. Bob does the same. He's sending his certificate, which consists of his public key, his ID information, maybe his email address, together with S index B, means the signature over that information. And now the certificate arrives at Bob's side, right? Bob gets Alice's certificate. What is the first thing that he has to do now? Before he actually does the Diffie-Hellman stuff, what does he do first? What is this whole idea? What is this one verb, two Wort I'm waiting for? What do you do with a certificate if you get a certificate? What is a certificate? Certificate is just public key with a digital signature. What do you do if you get a digital signature? Verify. Good. So you verify. So Bob takes certificate of A, Alice's certificate, and this is his whole idea. This is just an application of a digital signature. You verify this, and you get, of course, a true or false statement. And if it's a false statement, there's something wonky. Maybe Oscar is in the middle. If it's correct, which we hope it's, yeah. But, what kind of key do we need at this point? Verification needs a key. What kind of key do we need? Public or private? Public, of course. This is the easy part, okay? The hard part, whose public key? Wessen öffentlicher Schlüssel? CA. Very good. There's this CA, this trusted authority. Why do we do that? Well, if you see here, who's doing the signing? CA. You see this here? Actually, only this index. Can I do that? No. Okay. This signature is computed with the algorithm of the certifying authority. If you want to verify the signature, we need the CA key. If this checks out correctly, what does Bob know? Bob knows now for sure that this is actually Alice's key. That means he can actually do the Diffie-Hellman. He can compute KAB, which is alpha to the, which is uppercase A to the B, which is alpha A B. Alice can do the same. Alice verifies Bob's certificate using also the public key of the certifying authority of the CA. If this turns out to be correct, she can also do her side of the Diffie-Hellman. That means she can compute KAB, which is B to the 8th power, which is alpha to the B to the A. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, there are two things I want to discuss at this point. Very important, and we need 5 more minutes. And actually the last 5 minutes, which is kind of unusual, sometimes towards the end it's kind of comes some kind of additional information, and if you're asleep or you have to go to the next lecture, that's perfectly fine. This is wrong today. The last 5 minutes are not the most important one, but they're quite important. There are two things I want to explain. Maybe the main thing is, no, not the main, yeah. So maybe the main thing is, do we really prevent the attack? And we haven't really talked about it. What about Oscar? Oscar probably wants to do the same trick again. That means Oscar would like to to do the following. Oscar would like to calls it a tilde here, right? To forward a faked public key, or a tilde. And of course, he can do, right? If he has channel control over the channel, he can do that. What is the problem with this step now here? Where will this attack by Oscar fail? At which step here of this blackboard? Yeah. No, there's no. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to sign anything here. He's just doing this stuff. Verification fails here, right? Is this clear? Because what CA has signed, the signature is over Alice's public key here at this point, right? And you jumped one step ahead, which was absolutely right. So he knows this will fail, right, at this point. Signature doesn't check out, it doesn't verify. So what does he have to do? He has to issue a fake certificate, right? So what Oscar would really like to do, what he would really like to do, is to compute a signature. I have to be careful. Yeah. He would like to compute a tilde, this is his fake public key, together with ID of Alice. And can he do that? Well, first thing, he buys my book. He watches video, right? So for free. So he knows how digital signature works, right? He uses RSA 2048. He knows he needs a private key here. He gets that's from the video. The problem is he needs the private key that belongs to the CA, which he hopefully does not have, right? You can imagine these, yeah?
Question, couldn't Oscar sign it with his own false CA key?
So like K private CA / Oscar, something like this.
And then interrupt the verification.
Sehr gut. Yeah. Right.
His false
Right, yeah. So now this is number 2. Very, very good. So first of all, I'll come back to that in 60 seconds. Okay. First, stay here. He cannot do that. He doesn't have the CA key. Have you heard this term like root certificate or root key? This is this here. If you are an attacker, if you get this key from like VeriSign, this is one of the big companies that makes money with selling certificates. If you get this CA key, this, and the root key is just an RSA or elliptic curve or a discrete logarithm key. If you get this key, hell is loose, right? Die Hölle ist los. Because you can start issuing fake certificates. This would be really bad. Or Microsoft root key, super difficult. It would be tremendous consequences. And it's actually quite interesting to see how people protect their CA keys. There are companies, and this I'm not kidding. This sounds like a wild story. There are people in Switzerland. One thing that distinguishes Switzerland from most other countries, there are a lot of big mountains. Yeah? And during the Cold War, they actually dug bunker in the mountains. There are people renting out these atombombensichere bunker places in the Alps to have super secure servers here where the CAs are in. A lot of physical security and stuff. They're super, super sensitive. Why? If you can do that, the whole system collapses. And like internet-wide, you can start issuing false certificates. You don't want to do that. So this is the first thing I wanted to say. So the attack here doesn't work. But now the kommilitone, he jumped one step ahead. Very smart idea. He said, okay, he's coming up with his own CA key, right? So he just takes any kind of signing key, any kind of RSA key here. And of course, this would fail here at this point. But now and that was his really, really good idea, what I kind of omitted here, was ich Ihnen nicht gesagt habe. What you need at this point, of course, somewhere there must be the CA, and the CA has to Everybody with me? This is, again, CA is just essentially a public key service, a public key algorithm is active. And now the idea is, use this red box over there. This is just a public key algorithm. Why don't we do a man-in-the-middle attack? And where do we have to do that? At this point, right? If you run a man-in-the-middle attack at this point, you can exactly do your attack. And this is kind of what I said in the beginning when I started the certificate stuff 30 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago. I said there seemed to be some kind of missing link in this argument because I'm using public key to protect public key, but then I have this universal attack that always works. And this is exactly the point. You paid very, very good attention here. In theory, Oscar can run the attack here, absolutely. And if he interferes here, if he interferes and he sends this to Bob, he can issue his fake certificates, the whole thing collapses. And now is the question, this is a real-world question. It has nothing to do with this protocol. This is now step outside the blackboard, step outside the course, think about the real world. Why is this in difficult practice? What can the CA, what can we as human mankind, the menschheit, what can we do so that this attack becomes pretty difficult? Yeah.
We synchronize the K.CA because it's a static key, right? So it might always be synchronized before we communicate.
Yeah, that's the question. We can synchronize that, and I don't think they're doing that anymore, but they were in the, and they're similar to this. He said synchronize, essentially checks that, right? There's what the New York Times, which is a big major newspaper in the US, what they did in their Sunday edition, the Sonntagsausgabe, what they did during the 1990s, I don't know whether they still did that, they printed a big public key in the New York Times Sunday editions. So you could, if you wanted, you can hand check the hex symbols and look whether you really had to read the original one or the faked one. So this is one way of doing that, right? Yeah. This is one thing. But it's even better. Here's kind of the solution to the problem. How often do you have to exchange this public key here, the green one? In an ideal world, only once, right? And here's what's happening. Is anybody using Microsoft Windows? Yeah, okay. So if you have Microsoft, if you have an original Microsoft Windows product or Thunderbird web browser, if you get this stuff, the web browsers have these keys pre-installed, okay? And so what it boils down to, of course, you need an authenticated link. You must make sure this transmission happens correctly, but only once at setup time. And if you buy an original Microsoft product, unless somebody fiddled around, put another key in the CD that you're using to installing that stuff. Unless this happened, if you buy an original CD that has been tampered with, you have the public key. And once you have this one public key, you essentially have one. This is the whole idea. Okay? Of course, yes, certificates are in principle vulnerable against man-in-the-middle attack, against these CA public keys. But if you're a little bit careful, you make sure that at setup time, once you get the real public key installed, you win. I stop at this point. We could probably, and I'm only half exaggerating, we could probably spend a whole semester now talking about the real world implication, maybe 7 weeks, maybe half a semester. But we stop at this point and let's do the homework and then let's see what's happening next week. Okay? Thank you very much.